Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. We have Grand Valley with Group 3 cars once again, and if you recall, that is the combination of the very first guide that I made. However, on the very first time that they gave us this combination, they kind of changed it, I think maybe just an hour after releasing it because the pits were broken. This time, the pits actually work, and because of that, with the required pit strategy, you can defeat the meta car just a little bit easier. Let's get into it. The RX Vision is our anti-meta car of the week. It is strong enough to be the meta car pretty often, but this week it definitely isn't quite as fast as the Supra. It can't pass the Supra on the straights, but it can pass it absolutely anywhere else, and it's also really good on the tires, so that is why it's our choice of the week. Taking just a glance at the leaderboard, you can see it is absolutely lousy with Supras, just completely infested with Supras, if you will. But as you can see from this, the RX Vision is definitely capable of being both your qualifying car and your race-based car. Other cars are capable of putting up good times, but you can see the Supra is clearly the meta. As we start off, we want to start on the right side of the track so that we can angle ourselves and get a straight line into the braking zone. The goal is to make sure that your steering wheel is straight before you hit the brakes. Point your nose about where the yellow line disappears and brake about 10 to 15 feet before the 200-meter board. Use the Gran Turismo Magic ABS as you try to double apex this corner. Once you hit the first apex, that's when we're going to start trail braking, lifting off entirely, and then making sure you turn and be patient to hit that second apex. I missed it a little bit there, but I was pretty close. I do think you can cut off even more time by being really disciplined and hitting that second apex. Don't go wide as you enter the high-speed S, that just wastes time. Do your best initial de-impression here using the gutter to pull your car around, but do not touch the dirt because it will absolutely give you a penalty even if you just graze it. Do the same thing for this left hand right here, but again, do not touch the dirt, you'll get an instant penalty. Make sure you straighten the wheel enough before you hit the brakes, and we're going to brake right before the 300. Your goal is to stay fully on the brakes until the last moment. We're going to go in a completely straight line until we get to the end of the concrete barrier on the left. We're going to start turning in, staying 100% on the brakes, and right before we get to this rock here, we're going to try to hit the apex directly on the other side of it. So we're going to lift off once we get to first gear, then back up to second gear once we pass that rock, and gently get on the throttle, trying to track out all the way to the edge so you don't turn too much while you're getting on the throttle. That will make you oversteer. Pay attention to your steering inputs. You don't want to do anything too suddenly, but you want to make sure that you're straightening the wheel out just a little bit as you track out. Our next marker we're going to look for is the 100-meter board, but we're just going to use that to turn in. We're not going to hit the brakes until we cross over this yellow line right here. Scrub off speed gently as you're staying third until you cross the yellow line again, and then we're going to get down to second gear. Back to third before we get on the throttle, and we want to be very gentle with the throttle and the steering so we can hit this apex and then track out all the way towards the wall, making sure not to slide at all. Turn in early enough so you're all the way past this white line before you get to the yellow sign on the left. Gently brake, get down to second gear, and once you get past this apex, give it just enough throttle so that when you get all the way underneath the Grand Valley sign, that's when we're going to brake again, get to first gear, hug this apex, and get on the throttle as soon as you possibly can. Again, you have to be very careful because you can spin the rear tires and you'll lose all your momentum if you do. Also, of course, avoid the dirt everywhere. We want to hug the wall all the way until you get to the braking point, which is going to be right at the 100-meter board here on the right. We're not going to brake 100%, but we're going to try to turn in as soon as we do brake. Dip down to first gear right before you get to the apex, and then back on the throttle right as you get underneath that banner above. Get on the throttle gently so you don't deviate from your line, but we want to hit about the middle of the track before we turn in right before the marbles. As you turn in, gently lifting off the throttle will allow the nose to tuck in a little bit, but then we want to get on the brakes just gently enough to get closer and closer to the apex. We want to hit our clipping point right about where the bridge starts. Get back in third gear and back on the throttle, but be really gentle, not to worry about oversteer, but understeer. You can use all of this extra curbing here, but make sure you come back off of it before the barrier juts out. As we're approaching the final section, I want you to remember two things. It's all about flow and exit speed. Once we get to the 100-meter board, that is our braking point. We want to get down to third gear and then wait till we hit this sign here on the left before we turn in. Continue full braking as we drop to second gear and then start trail braking right before you get to the yellow line in the middle. Come off the brakes when you hit the apex and then use the throttle just to hug it without going up on that curb to the right. Keep balancing the throttle until your nose is pointed all the way into the right lane, then full throttle until you get out of the tunnel, then we turn in and lift. Use the brakes just to make sure that you can hit this apex, and we want to go almost in a straight line between these two curbs. Be very gentle with the throttle because you can spin here, and if you go over the curbs at full throttle, you might also spin there. The dirt comes up onto the track a little bit, and so it kind of hides where the track runoff is, so be very careful as you get onto the side there. Minimize your steering through this section and make sure that you set yourself up so that you can go over the inside curb here. Putting 2 tires on the curb allows your car to rotate a little bit, which means that you don't have to steer as much and you create less friction with the steering, and that can help maintain a higher speed. From here, straight line all the way to the finish. Like I mentioned in the breakdown, we want to be all the way on the right so we can turn in early enough that we can be going in a straight line before we hit the brakes. Turn in and use Gran Turismo's magic ABS, get down to 2nd gear before trail braking, and try to double apex this. I definitely missed the 2nd apex, but it wasn't too bad. I think we still got a really good exit. When it comes to this section, we want to use the gutter technique that you see in Initial D. If you haven't watched Initial D, I definitely suggest it, and definitely avoid the dirt as well. 300 meters is your braking point here, again using the magic ABS and trying to late apex this corner as much as you possibly can. The second sector is all about flow and momentum. You don't need to go all the way to the right here to get a really good line and to keep up your speed, but you do want to go all the way to the wall here in the second section of the second sector. Keeping up your speed on the short right-hander and using a little bit of throttle before this really tight left-hander is really important. You want to sneak in as much throttle as you possibly can between corners. A lot of people go too wide entering here, and a lot of people also slow down too much here. Again, just keep up your momentum and don't deviate from the line that you want to take. For S corners, it's really important to turn before you get on the brakes, because if you brake and then turn, you have to transfer the weight more, and that just wastes a lot of time. Over and under braking can cause understeer really bad into this corner, so it just takes a lot of practice. Your goal is to make sure you don't understeer or oversteer through any part of this. If you can get on the throttle earlier than other people right here, then you can make a really good attempt at passing. When it comes to long straights, it's really about who gets on the throttle first. Essentially, your goal is to make the straight longer than your opponent's straight, if that makes sense. It's also really important to use the curb here because, like I said in the breakdown, you can steer less if you do have 2 tires on the curb, and that causes less friction, which means more momentum for you. Alright, let's take a look at race strategy. Once again, I was really lucky to decide on the anti-meta car long before my stream on Monday, so I was able to get this race done really early on. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the strategy really does help beat the meta car. When it was just an all-out sprint without really bad tire wear, it was really easy for the meta car to just kind of take off and stay in front. But now that strategy is involved, if you start from the back, or if you just want to employ the strategy in a different way than the people using the meta car, it can definitely work to your advantage. I talk pretty frequently about using a specific strategy when it comes to these races, but it's really important to be flexible with your strategy and just have kind of an idea or a concept of what you want to do with your strategy in order to make judgment calls when you're in the middle of the race. In pretty much any race, you want to be able to use the fastest tire compound for as long as you're able to stay fast with it. And because of the medium tire being the faster compound, that meant that it can last almost the entirety of the race, at least with this car. Actually, scratch that. If you only had to drive on the mediums, then I think that this car could probably do the entirety of the race on the mediums without losing too much pace at all. In situations like this, it's really important to know the people that are around you. I know that Damien is one of the fastest drivers in the world. KP Wilcox is also an incredibly fast driver, and both of them are in really good cars. I also have Bacon Slayers, also known as F1 Slayers, behind me, and he's a friend of mine. And if you recall from the last video, friends will definitely be as aggressive as possible with each other, but also help out when you really need. When it comes to the beginning of this race, it's kind of a free-for-all. At the beginning, everyone's just trying to get a good position so that when the race kind of opens up, we can just use our pace to continue making passes and get ahead. When it comes to people you trust, obviously, you don't want to go side by side with people you don't trust, but we had Damien. And so it was actually really comforting knowing that he was the person next to me, because that meant not only was I safe, but also I was going to be able to maintain a really good pace at the beginning of the race without worrying about really slowing down. Because as you can see, we're still with the majority of the group, even though Damien and I were side by side for multiple corners there. Now, amidst all the chaos, Damien and KP were both able to get a little bit ahead, and then I was still essentially in the exact same position that I had started in. Now, seeing that A-Hart was going to go for a move and Damien was defending, that actually just means there's an opportunity for me here. Hart had kept changing his mind, and it was pretty obvious that he was going to go wide because he was braking really late from a weird position, so I knew that I could safely dive in. Even if I missed the apex a little bit, then I was going to be safe without hitting him. Since his line was so compromised coming out of that corner, I knew that I had the advantage. As long as I stayed on the throttle and maintained my momentum, I was going to be able to get through really easily. And unfortunately for him, since he did have such a compromised line, he lost, I think, 3 positions just then. Now, this is why I was talking about having a flexible pit strategy. The fastest strategy, if there was no traffic, would be to do 9 laps on mediums. However, since Shadow Realm and Damien both went in, and I also knew that Bacon Slayers was going to go in, and I think whoever was behind him would also go in, that meant there was going to be a lot of traffic both in front and behind me, and that's just a recipe for slow pace. This is another situation where knowing your opponents is really, really useful. I knew that Shadow Realm was going to defend, and I knew that Damien was going to attack. That meant that both of those guys were going to go slow in front of me, at least for a short period of time. With Slayers behind me, I knew that he would be on the attack if I were going slow, and so that would slow us all down if that happened while I was trying to pass the 2 in front. The strategy now would be just to go as fast as possible on the hard tires, because hard tires, even though they're much slower than the mediums, are going to be faster than trying to battle people on the fast tires. At this point, however, I thought that my strategy was completely not going to work. I'm not sure what happened with VXT. I think he got into a bit of an incident and or possibly got dirty tires. And you can see he's still struggling here, so I went for the really aggressive move. He slid out anyways. I don't think that was anything bad. He didn't get mad at that. And so I was able to cleanly get in front of him right before he had to serve that penalty, and then I didn't have to worry about that anymore. With KP nearly 2 seconds ahead, Romeo Sim over a second behind me, I didn't really have to worry about anyone now. Now I can focus on going just as fast as I possibly can and then getting into the pits, and hopefully I'll still have clean air once I come out of the pits on the fresh, new fast tires. I'm not exactly sure how much time I lost being stuck behind VXT, however I knew that it was significant. I also did not know what was going on with the people who decided to pit a lap earlier than I did, but I was, like I said before, completely convinced that my overcut strategy was not going to work. I'm just now realizing that I forgot to talk about something super important in this, so we're going to take the pit stop time to do that. If you look at the map, you'll see that we have northeast winds at about 20.4 feet per second. The wind, for whatever reason, in this week's daily changes, so make sure you get a southeast wind when you're doing your time trials. The wind direction will definitely change how your car behaves, so if you look at the fact that we've got a headwind going into the first section, that means you can brake a little bit later than you would in other situations, so that's definitely something to consider. Anyways, back to the race. You'll see that Shadow Realm and Damien are now behind me. Those 2 guys were in front of me after they went into the pits when I decided not to go into the pits. And if you consider all of the things that happened, you'll see exactly how detrimental it was for those 2 to be battling the entire time. Not only did I have the slower, harder tires, I was also held back for probably about a half lap behind someone who was going much slower, who was also serving a penalty and who made a big mistake in front of me. That means that those 2 people had to be battling so much that they wasted enough time to be on the softer, faster tires to go slower than me being held back on the harder tires. I don't want to point fingers, but I can tell you that Damien is absolutely one of the best Gran Turismo drivers I've ever met. One of the best in the world. So if he had trouble going at a good pace because of whoever was defending with him, then it's most likely someone over defending at the very early stages of a race, and that's going to cost both of those 2 people a lot of positions. It's always your prerogative to defend. If you want to maintain your position, defending is racing. However, it's not always the best idea. If you don't know the person is much faster than you, you've got to take some hints and try to figure it out. If you have to defend every single corner for an entire lap, that person behind you is probably a lot faster than you. And I know that Damien is actually definitely the fastest person in this entire lobby. I really want to expand on this more because knowing when to defend is really one of the most important things when it comes to racing people who are faster than you and just racing in general. So if Damien wasn't held back at all, since I did a full extra lap on the slower tire, I think Damien would probably be at least a second, if not a second and a half to 2 seconds ahead of me by the time I came out of the pits. Since we've already discussed the fact that Damien is the fastest person in this lobby, you would probably be able to follow him, use his slipstream, and maybe just keep up with him, looking at how he does this in order to maintain a pace better than you could by yourself. Definitely, if you're in a car like the Porsche, you'd be able to go a little bit faster because the RX Vision would be able to tow you around. With Jay Kloppel 3.6 seconds ahead, that would mean that Damien and the person following would be very cleanly in front of me and behind him, and we would all be able to just focus on our pace rather than battling. I want you to keep that hypothetical situation in your mind as we jump forward in the race. Jay Kloppel is a buddy of mine, and he is a very competent driver, so this really shows what the Supra can do. It took 3 more laps for me even to get in his slip, and at the start of this straight, we're about 3/10 behind. It's going to be ridiculous to see how far ahead he's going to be at the end of this, despite the fact that I was fully in his slip. With almost any other car, I would be right on his bumper, if not already passing him in the RX Vision, but because of Supra things, we've barely caught up. However, also because of Supra things, it's definitely not as good on the tires as the Mazda, and that is why this is a perfect anti-meta against the Supra. As you can see, I closed in a little bit, and I didn't want to use too much of the slipstream because I didn't want to be too close to him here. If I'm too close and I have to slow down a lot leading into the S's, then it's going to make it so I can't really attack going into the next corner. I unfortunately miscalculated, so again, I had to work to try to get close enough to try to pass. Back on the subject of what happened with Damien, Damien is now 2 full seconds behind me. A couple laps before this, he was actually only 3/10 behind me, but I think he had to serve a penalty. And serving that penalty on top of how much he had to wear his tires down right as soon as he got on them, that meant that his pace was suffering because of the tires, most likely. Damien, again, is an incredible driver, and he's definitely faster than me, so in a normal situation, he'd be able to pass me a long time before now. Like I said at the beginning, you can't really pass the Supra on the straights, but everywhere else, that is an opportunity to pass. So this S right here was a very good place. The only problem with this is if I'm not far enough ahead of him leading into the straight after this little section, then he's going to be able to use his superpower and the slip to get in front of me really easily. So I had to concentrate and make sure I get through here as cleanly as quickly as possible. Racing with friends has been a really big topic on these videos lately, and it's important to remember that friends will always try to beat you when they can, but friends also know when it would really just slow both of you down too much. And so, like we were talking about with Damien, Kloppel knew that if he tried to pass me here, he'd probably be able to get in front of me if he used the slipstream, but he just stayed out of it. Because if he did get in front of me, it would just waste both of our time with me trying to pass him again. And if that happened, then we'd be sitting ducks against the likes of Monaco and the other people. Now, I got really, really lucky that I was able to get in front of Monaco before he got to that first corner, but Jay Kloppel was not quite as lucky, so unfortunately he got stuck behind him. With the Supra, really worn mediums are probably slower than fresh hards, and that's not the case with the RX Vision. Jumping forward all the way to the end, you'll see that I wasn't quite able to get close enough to them. Plaka Plum is in the other car I considered for an anti-meta car, but I didn't quite like it as much as this one, though it is incredibly fast and it can pass the Supra. The Genesis is also incredibly fast, so despite them not having great tires, well, they had fresh tires, but despite them being on the hard tires, they were able to go really, really fast, especially in the straight, and there's nothing I could do. But if you pay attention to the fact that Plaka Plum is only a second ahead, that means that if Damien wasn't held back, and if the person who was defending against him had just ridden with him, they both could have been in first and second. Thank you once again for watching my video. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and all of that good stuff. And as promised, I will be coming out with a new type of video very, very soon. Stay tuned.